Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Everybody full? Now I got to wear my
Still eating.
physician hat for a second. We know about that postprandial sleep that occurs, right? We're not having it, just letting you know. But I think we have assembled two exceptional leaders who have very powerful voices and lots of insights to share to us about another aspect of what we've been talking about today about inclusion, but from a different dimension, and how leadership in this space really carries and has a lot of weight. But it's probably one of the more difficult areas to master, and hence it's not done in a very effective and consistent way across leadership. But I think it's where our greatest opportunity is for the challenges that we currently have and are taking on. I've got a slide here just to kind of set the backdrop for a framework that we use at Kaiser Permanente. And it's something we developed jointly several years ago with Deloitte, but it's based on research around when you talk with people and employees and members of our respective teams in the organization, and you ask them what traits, what attributes, what consistent behaviors do leaders that inspire and engender trust from you, from your perspective, what are these attributes and traits that they have to consistently display? What that data shows very clearly, both in attribute and in behaviors, and the impact it has on people actually experiencing and feeling that they are included, and as a result of being included, that they are highly valued, and as a result of being valued, they're included in conversations that impact the work that they're there to do for the organization. Not the least of which is at the design table to design operational approaches to work in the name of process improvement, quality improvement, where they get a chance to bring their innovative voice and perspective to the table. And this notion of belonging is more than just a slogan. So for a moment, imagine you're invited to the design table for a critical project to help redesign a process to enable the way work is done in an organization. And you're one thrilled that you're invited to the table, this diverse gathering of people from a variety of dimensions and perspectives. But as the conversation is going, first and foremost, nobody asks you for your opinion. You're around the table and there's lots of conversation, lots of people bringing suggestions, but no one turns to you and say, we haven't heard from you, what's your thought on this? So that's one dimension. The next dimension is they actually ask you for your opinion, but when you give it, it doesn't appear that anybody's listening to it. Next scenario, you give it, they listen to it, but they don't value it enough to say, this is something that we would seriously consider going forward with. Thank you for your opinion. Or there could be the final opportunity where you are inspired to speak because you believe your voice will be heard. Your voice is not only heard, but it is actually listened to. And as a result of being listened to, actually has influence and impact. And as a result of that, has the potential to be the best idea that emerges from that discussion on that day. The fact that that is real, it is recurring, and it is possible, and that's the mindset you walk around with every day and doing your work, that's what real inclusion feels like on a day-to-day basis. And so these attributes of leaders, the demonstration of humility, and many different ways to do that, but one way, for example, is giving credit to where the best idea came from. Rather than saying, I'm the beneficiary of the great ideas of my team, but when that is being celebrated, I'm the leader, so therefore I get the credit. No, that idea came from this person on our team, or that group of people in our division, et cetera. People observing that type of behavior, that kind of recognition, at the end of the day, what that engenders is not just this feeling of inclusion, but probably more importantly, the feeling of belonging and trust. Because I can tell you, when you're talking about change to all human beings is a threat. That's how we experience it. Because it's different. We know what the status quo is, we know what our comfort zone is, but change pushes us out of our status, it challenges us to move outside of our status quo. And we experience that emotionally and psychologically as a threat. So what what is the best substance, the best intervention for managing people trying to do something when they feel like they're under threat? They have to find some way to trust each other, the leader, the circumstances, the company. There has to be trust. And it's hard to create trust in the moment if you haven't been building trust over time. So we're going to talk about that orientation around what inclusion is. And we have individuals here who come from the entrepreneurial experience of building a company, having investors learn to trust, creating services and value for a market and getting consumers to trust, and being highly successful in that space to make a difference in how people work and share together. Or in a military environment where individuals are asked to put themselves in harm's way, perhaps in some cases in the ultimate way of what they put on the line in the name of an idea around freedom and protection and so forth. So how do you get inside people before those situations occur so that that is the response? So that's the background and some of the experience that the individuals we have here today are going to be able to share with us. But I want you to keep that broad context in mind of this notion of inside out, which is a different orientation or different dimension of inclusion than what we've talked about today. It's another complement to it. So let's get started. So the first question.
Already won.
Right. And we know, I think as we have this dialogue, this conversation, there's going to be, I think, a desire for a lot of engagement. So we're going to try to be impactful, share insights, but also be brief so that we have plenty of time for a dialogue and get the most out of this limited time that we have here this afternoon. So one of the first questions I would like to ask both of you to respond to is, in the name of being a change agent and taking people through change, we already know before that starts that resistance is going to show up in some form or fashion for a lot of different reasons. So just to get us started, can you give us some ideas about how you are intentional in identifying resistance, and once you encounter it, the root cause of it, and then how that informs your approach to how you're going to lead in that particular circumstance? So whether in principle or from actual life experience, like each of you to make a few observations regarding that. Luke, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. It's been my job to make people uncomfortable for 20 years, and I've gotten used to it. But I find that the best way to approach this topic of diversity, is to make sure that you have credible facts backing you up. I also think that a not so hidden part of my success is that I'm a white man, and I have a background of being a naval aviator. And so I appear to be very similar to the management teams of most corporations, especially when I started, there was no diversity. So I appeared to be one of them, and I was bringing in a message that was uncomfortable, but because there was some commonality that they could see and they could read in my bio, they were more open to listen. But it would end right there if I didn't have my facts and figures straight. And so to help a leadership team at a corporation understand, there's several things. I mean, it could be threat. It could be, you're going to get sued, or the marketplace is going to turn against you, or your reputation's going to suffer. That doesn't really work very well, I've found. The best thing is benefit and inevitability. So I don't know if you caught this 2 weeks ago on the Washington Post website. We have switched from being majority white new entrants to the workforce to being majority non-white new entrants to the workforce as of September 9th in the Washington Post. So this has been coming for a long time, and they had a really excellent graph where you saw labor participation rates and components converging to where we cross over, and now non-white people are the majority. And if you add in women to that, and people, people with disabilities, and people who are LGBT, if you add all those other components in, white men who are Christian heterosexual without disabilities is maybe 20% of the workforce now, new entrants. So back when I started this 20 years ago, this seemed to be on the horizon. But when you can speak to it as it's here, it's now, it's essential for the survival of your organization, it's essential for your commitment to the shareholders to increase their return on equity, it helps smooth the conversation so that what is feeling uncomfortable and disruptive becomes compelling. And so that's how I've done it, Ron.
Great. John?
Yeah, very similar. But before I get started, in the name of giving credit where credit's due, I got to give Luke a lot of credit. He's been an advisor to me throughout my 4 years as the Chief of Naval Operations. And your very practical, fact-based approach, the fact that even within the 50 top companies, the top 10 do different things than the bottom 10. The very practical approach was super useful for me as the Chief of Naval Operations. And also, Dr. Ashley Merriman's here, who was my diversity and inclusion advisor. And so if I say anything that's even close to being right or smart, it's because of these two people. And if I mess it up, that's because I'm injecting myself into it at great risk.
Now, that's what humility is all about.
But I will tell you that very similar to what Luke says is that the Navy is a really big organization. It's about 600,000 people, 400,000 sailors, and 200,000 civilians. And it's also got the challenge of we bring in about 40,000 new sailors a year. And so, on an average year, about 1/3 of every command turns over. So you get a new crop of people that just need to kind of get on board with whatever you're trying to do. But if you can tie it to success, and that's becoming increasingly important, that we really tied diversity of every type to really coming together to form the most resilient and successful approaches to success, whatever the command might be doing. And to exclude that is to really, almost build in a blind spot, right? That can be exploited by your competition. And so if you tie it very directly to success, and this idea of belonging and trust is really key to it too, Doctor, because, as you said, we really, in the most stressing situation, we're going to be counting on each other for our lives, right? Depending on one another. And so that foundation of trust has got to be 100% when you're going that far. To the makeup of the workforce, we're seeing that in the Navy very, very vividly. And in fact, just recently at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the white male is now the minority cadre, if you will, coming in. And so, our women are going through about 28, 29% of the every class that's coming in. And the whole dynamic on the campus is changing by virtue of that progress. We're not there yet, but we're making steady progress.
And how do you build trust from your experience?
I think you build trust by tying the aims of your organization to your values as a profession, right? And so we always wanted to make the Navy, regardless of what was going on around us, and it's been turbulent, make the Navy that place that if you really believe the principles on which America was founded, that you could come to no better organization than the United States Navy to live a life that bears out those principles. And then you've got to follow through. What are the actions that are the litmus tests? Are you walking that talk? And you'll find what I found was that one, in order to do that, you have to be very clear from the top, right? So as the Chief of Naval Operations and all of my commanders, you had to be unambiguous in terms of your support in very practical ways. And so the guidance from the top has to be very clear. And then, particularly to energize the middle, to empower sort of the more junior sailors who are full of great ideas and come from all over the country, and listen to them, and then and hold the middle management accountable for listening to them as well. That builds that sense of belonging, that sense of trust.
Okay, right.
Can I You have a story. I'm gonna ask you the question and force you to tell the story. But you told me a great story. There was a problem with women's hair, black women's hair, for years and years and years in the Navy, and it wasn't resolved. And then one day, I didn't even know it was going to happen. I'm reading it's resolved. How did that happen?
Yeah, so this
Talk
is
about
this
trust.
is Luke's trap, right? So, well, I will tell you, and I kind of have difficulty telling this story just because it's so impactful to me. But so we used to live in Southeast Washington D.C. on the Navy Yard, and on weekends I would use this one particular coffee shop as kind of my neighborhood office, right? We had a lot of meetings in this one shop, but we'd always show up in jeans and a T-shirt or whatever. It was all pretty casual. And there was one Sunday morning where I was checking out, and the woman behind the counter, the barista, she was an African-American woman, said, "Hey, you're the guy who fixed the hair, aren't you?" And I said, hold on a second, how does this situation arise? How do you know, one, that who I am, and then two, this that we fix the hair? And I said, well, I had a lot of help, and the fact of the matter is that's exactly right. So it was right around the Charlottesville time, and Black Lives Matter were very, very vivid in our national conversation, and it just realized. No matter how hard I tried, I just could not see the United States Navy like our African-American sailors, right? And so I said, hey, I had a very diverse staff, so I got all of our African-American members of my staff and got them together in a room. And it was funny because when they all got there, they looked around and was like, okay, what's up here? We can see there's something in common. So I walked in. I was nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof because I just did not know how this was going to go. But I basically said, hey, I don't know how to do this, and I need a lot of help. And, will you help me be the best chief of naval operations for all of our sailors, particularly our African-American sailors? And this is, again, very practical. So if I say something that really sounds stupid, you got to stop me. Or if you see an opportunity coming up that I don't see, please steer me into that opportunity, because I just don't understand it like you understand. So, and I was worried how they were going to respond to that, but they were absolutely fantastic. They said, oh yeah, we're deputized, we're going to help you out here. And I said, hey, is there anything, just sort of a quick kill, if you will, something I could do right now? And the women said, hey, you got to fix the hair. The hair regulations in the Navy for African-American females are impossible. We're going to be all bald by the time we're 40, trying to meet these regulations. We can't do that. We got to burn our hair or whatever it is to do this. So I said, hey, done. Let's put together a proposal. If you would lead the effort. And these young women put together the most professional proposal I'd ever seen. They compared against all the other services out throughout history, and they put together this fantastic program to just change our regulations. We did it on Facebook Live. To your point about credit, they did it all. I did a little bit of an entry, and then all of this team came on, and they announced it. And it seemed like a tiny thing, but it was impactful enough that this woman in this coffee shop behind the counter, not associated with the Navy at all, had somehow heard about it and was meaningful enough that they mentioned it. And I think it's these types of things that make big progress towards this sense of belonging, right? For all of those women, they said, hey, this is something that, hey, we now feel like we belong a little bit more to this organization because they responded that way. So
The story blew me away. I mean, really, because to think, this man was the most powerful admiral in known human history, and he gets credit for fixing the hair. But that's what's important. That's what was important, and you fixed it. And I thought to bring in people in the room and say, well, what do I do? And then to take their advice and promulgate it quickly. It was done quickly.
yeah,
It was
very
like,
quickly.
I mean, that to me, and when you told me the story, it said it's not like I go there with a sandwich board saying, I am the United States Navy on it, ringing a bell. Nobody would know who he is in civilian clothes. Look, when he's in uniform, the 4 stars and the chest full of medals, but civilian in weekend close, and a woman says, "You're the guy who fixed the hair." I think the degree of trust that was required for you to push that through was just phenomenal. I love that story.
And think about the next time.
Right.
People having gone through that experience and the stories they tell around inclusion at that level and designing, as I said earlier, designing the solution and then having sponsorship that actually deploys and implements it. So that's what inclusion really looks like up close and personal when it's practiced at a high level. What would you say is the most important question for a leader to ask him or herself, as well as the people they're leading, when you're about to take on a critical change initiative?
In my opinion, and there's a book out currently, it's a bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I recommend it to you, all of you read it. It's really good. But in my mind, and how I got here, was being exposed to what I didn't know. And it was another pilot named Tony Cato, Naval Academy graduate, and he took the time to expose me to what I didn't know. And when it finally sunk in, it was this veil was lifted. I looked around and said, I did not see all of this before. So in a time of change, you have to think about what you could not possibly know. And that takes a bit of introspection and I think discussion. So if you don't know about black women's hair, bring in black women, talk to them. Yeah. I think you have to really think about those things when you're going into a significant change in an organization. That would be my answer.
Okay. How about you, John?
No, I think it's the same way, is just, particularly Navy, global organization, you're going to be interfacing with a lot of different cultures, with a lot of different values. There's a tremendous amount that you don't know. And so not only confronting, hey, what don't I know, but then the next question is, okay, who am I going to bring in the room and empower them to teach me and fill in all of those blind spots? And to your point, you got to get them in at the design level, don't you?
Yeah.
Because to just kind of bake this cake and then try and frost it over at the end, that's too late. It's got to be part of the main ingredients of the design going forward, and then tie it to your principles. How does this tie to our principles?
Yeah, there was a phrase used this morning early in discussion about patient leadership. I think Brad brought it up in his comments early this morning. And I guess from my leadership experience in terms of leading and managing change is really understanding that you have to disaggregate the steps that are part of a change engagement. And if you just think of it as a body of work and a lot of activity, I think that you lose some opportunity for effectiveness. So number one, we should all understand that change is going to require new learning. So and how adults learn in our various environments and so on, you have to account for that in the plan and in the way you're creating a narrative about how we're going to go forward with change. What new is going to have to be learned, and how am I going to enable people to have the right skill or access to the right information, the right training, and the right knowledge to acquire this new learned skill or awareness that they have to go forward for this big picture that's going to happen downstream. So there's the learning, but we know for adoption and impact, learning and knowledge is necessary but insufficient, because now it has to be translated into an actual skill. So now that you got knowledge and learning, you got to do something with it. So how do you give people the opportunity to practice, to learn new behaviors and the applications of this while they're in the middle of the field or in the actual operation? How do you buffer that? How do you make sure that's done in a way where people don't feel embarrassed or shamed, and that they are actually learning and that you're measuring so you're clear that they have the skills? And then how do you build the support around that on an ongoing basis? And I can think about, from a medical perspective, the big adoption or big changes that we've done in our organization over time. Probably the most infamous was when we, 15 years ago, got rid of paper and brought in electronic medical records to do all of our day-to-day care of patients and information, and then bringing artificial intelligence in that so that that system had access to all of our wellness and prevention databases for all of our 12 million members. And when they came in our offices, it would prompt us when they needed to have one of their screenings done so that it happened in real time. They were able to go get it done, and so our screening levels were off the chart. and that made our population a lot healthier because we picked up things early. But I can tell you, when we made the decision to go to electronic medical records, and I was executive medical director for one of our regional operations, I heard everything from my physicians who cared a lot about their patients and were working very diligently to provide care, to say everything from, I'm not gonna become a secretary and type on a machine for providing care. It's too inefficient, it's too slow. Some of my senior physicians retired on the spot because they just said, this is too much training, too much change for me at this point in my career, easy for me just to retire, let the young folks take it, et cetera. So there was all kind of reasons why folks said this is not going to work. And a lot of the concerns and the pain points they were describing were real. And so my point there is you have to be aware of that. You have to inquire and go to folks and ask them what is not working for you about this. And once folks, we heard those things and we made adaptations in real time, then we went on the learning journey and the doing and the skill building. We slowed down patient schedules so that they could see fewer patients when we were going live again, till they got their skill up to the right point, got used to working with this new technology. There was a way of going from an entry-level use of the tool to a super user level of the tool, and we gave people time and exposure to get to that level of efficiency to regain some of the productivity that we knew was going to be part of the journey. And then people accepted it, and then if you talk with those folks 2 or 3 years after that deployment, they said, I didn't like it when we were going through it, but now that I see what it can do, and most importantly, how it helps me take better care of my patients, now I would never go back. So that's a short microcosm of a journey, but the point I'm making there is about the important role of understanding what are the people actually going to go through, and be very clear about that. There is going to be new learning. That's the challenge. Where's the time for it? Who's doing the training, and so on. Then I got to actually do it, and I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my patients trying to type and put information in a 15 or 20-minute appointment slot, and I know another patient is sitting on the room waiting and complaining that they're waiting to be seen and they're off schedule. That's making me look bad in front of my patients. So understanding that and building in safeguards and managing the process, being patient in your leadership for the big game or the big victory that's going to occur later, that's an important part of this patient concept that we were talking about earlier in leadership. It's not giving up on it, it's not being too slow, it's allowing the steps that are predictable and necessary to get the big win to allow them to happen. So that kind of insight, I think, is another example of being smart and wise in the way you do leadership. And when you take people through that, not only do you get the result you want, and they're happier because they can provide better care and service to their patients, but as a leader, you are trusted because you took the time to understand, to take that into account, to minimize the pain points and still achieve the victory. So the next time a big change comes around the corner, and you know they're coming more rapid and more diffuse every day. When you call upon them again, they're going to say, here's a leader that I'm willing to follow in this space because I know he or she takes the time to understand. They gather information first, they adopt the approach and the solutions to our reality, and we still go forward and we advance as we learn and get our skills up. So I think that's an important construct when you're trying to do change, hard change, big change in an organization or system environment.
So Ron, humility to listen, but the objective always at the forefront of your mind. And so for people don't know, Kaiser Permanente is both a health insurance company and a hospital system. So their objective is to keep their customers as healthy as possible so they pay their premiums but don't need very costly health care that could have been avoided in the first place. So you had to go through a lot of these evolutions while you were Chief of Naval Operations. And I'll tell you something that I observed about you, because I've served 4 chiefs of naval operations. They're 4-year terms. So every 4 years you get a new chief of naval operations.
A dime a dozen.
By far the most humble leader I have ever worked with, you.
Oh, thanks.
Period, by far. There's not even a close second.
Doctor, I found the same thing, though, that this type of leadership takes time, doesn't it? I mean, it does take patience, and it's kind of counterintuitive a little bit, too, because you want to get moving, right? You want to get this thing in place, you want to start executing and get on to the next thing. And then a lot of us, convince ourselves that, hey, I could probably do 85 to 90% of this like in a weekend or in a week. But boy, that last 15 or 10% is just huge in terms of success. You know, that's all of the ingredients for success are in that last part, and it takes time to make that happen. You got to be patient.
I see our clock is ticking down, so I think now we're going to turn to the audience to use the time to get feedback, questions, curiosities, your experiences, whatever the case might be, before we wrap things up.
Thank you. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Tawana McFadden, I'm from Southern California, Edison.
Tawana, you just got taken away. Here's another microphone. There we go.
How about now?
There you go, yeah.
On is good.
Third time's a charm. Tawana McFadden for Southern California Edison is giving a bad rap for the military right now, too. So I'm in the military. I wanted to say thank you, because it's more than just about hair.
Yeah.
It's really about bringing your authentic self to work.
That's right.
And being comfortable with who you are. And so that conversation transcends into the civilian sector as well.
Yeah.
And so part of my question to you is, as we've talked about individuals bringing their full selves to work and really embracing what it is to be authentic and to be genuine so that they can be better performers, how do we encourage leaders who are not necessarily here to hear these messages and to push down this thought process? Because sometimes the middle folks get it, but we need to train our leaders as well to understand what that means to us and to have the courage and voice of people like yourself to hear the message of, hey, something as simple as changing hair policy really impacts how I feel. So what words of advice would you have for that?
Well, one word of advice I would give you is whatever level of leaders you're describing that you felt would benefit from that, find CEOs and other senior leaders in organizations like the military or other that are doing and leading in that way.
Yes.
And ask them to reach out to your leaders to touch base with them on progress and opportunities, because your senior leaders are in all kinds of networks and have their networks where they meet with other leaders and talk about what's going on in our respective industries, learning from you and the practices. But have leaders reach out to leaders is a very important thing. I think I've seen anybody master that and use that leverage to the T as Luke, is putting fellow leaders at the senior levels in touch with each other to talk about that and really make the case, because it's a high credibility and it's situational, but that makes a really big difference, is getting those credible conversations going.
Go ahead, John.
No, I think, in fact, as we think about leader development, just in the Navy context, you have to have leaders that are certainly competent in their jobs, right? Because you can't lead without knowing what you need to do. We've stressed a lot of character, right? So we need to be leaders of character, people who America would be proud to be out leading their sons and daughters. And then to the doctor's point, we talked a lot about this sense of community. And particularly for senior leaders, but even in middle, leadership can be a bit of a lonely thing, and your expectations of what you think you're supposed to do, are sometimes completely out of sync with what is the best thing to do. And so by talking to other leaders, you can kind of lower the whatever kind of walls or barriers that might exist between what you think you might be expected to do and what you probably need to be doing. And so this idea of competence, character, but also community is a powerful one. And there are many communities. There are communities of leaders, right? There's the community of you and your team. Your church is one community. Your health club is one. A lot of communities can make you kind of more receptive and more resilient, round you out a little bit. So.
I've got a more pragmatic answer, because we're not on this planet all that long. So if you can't discern those qualities that you're looking for in your leaders, find another job where you will find it. I'm not joking. I get to meet with a lot of senior leadership, and I get to meet with the good ones, because they won't talk to me if they don't care about this subject. They won't expose themselves that way. So I speak to the good ones, and they're all on different paths. But there's a lot of people that I've talked to who I would never work for. And I would tell my daughters to never work for that company. Don't ever. Why would you waste your time? I remember a woman switched jobs, a woman I was professionally and knew professionally as a friend. She took a job with a company. And I asked her, why would you waste your life like this? And she said, oh my God, it's terrible. I said, call me in exactly 365 days and tell me I'm wrong. I got a call in 365 days saying, I'm looking for a new job. You are absolutely right. It's a waste of my life. So I'm just saying, there's an old saying, never try to teach a pig to sing. It's a waste of your time and annoys the pig. Don't do it. It's your life. And you'll come home and you'll be mean to your dog. It's just awful. Don't do it. Don't do it. Find another job if you can. And I understand, I accept that there are people in this room who cannot do that because they have family circumstances or personal circumstances that prevent them from moving their job. And to you, I am very sorry that you're in that situation. I like to send people books anonymously. That could help. Seriously, send them how to be an anti-racist. And if they read it, it'll blow their minds. So there's a lot of books that you can send to people. Dying of Whiteness is another one. It tells about what's gone wrong with the culture in the middle of this country where there's 22,000 suicides a year. What has gone wrong? But so if you're stuck, do the best you can. Try to get leaders to talk to other leaders. But if you're not stuck, you're a valuable person. Go give of yourself to an organization who is going to respect who you are. It's really critical to have a happy life because you don't have a whole lot and you don't get a second chance.
Other questions, comments, observations?
Uh-oh. Got a race.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm following after that, but I actually want to say that I went over there and I took a photo. So I'm a patient with NIH, and a friend of mine is a retired naval officer. And he's like, I really want to do more. And so I took the picture and I said, these are 3 people, like many others, that are doing more. And I think at times we think we can't, but we can make a difference. It might seem small, but if it makes a small difference, then that's impactful. So I just want to say thank you. And he messaged me back. He's like, all right, I'm going to make a difference. So thanks.
Great, thank you.
That's great.
I'll try to keep it brief because I already got to speak. So I guess my question in a nutshell for all 3 of you is, what would you do to address the complacency argument that's often made against making changes for disabilities in an organization? Or at a higher level with VPs, the complacency argument of, well, disability is not already in my high priorities. I only have so many days in the year. Why should I shift it higher?
Well, the answer to that is because your boss is going to fire you unless you do. And I think that's, seriously, we have to drive our organizations so that the leadership says, wait a minute, the highest percentage of unemployed people are people with disabilities, and everybody else is at 3% unemployment. We're not taking advantage of this opportunity. What's the matter with us? And if you can't do it, I need to replace you as the leader with somebody who can. We've got to advance our organizations to that understanding. So that's my blunt answer, John.
I think just to rephrase that, what your
That's
boss...
why he was chief of naval operations and I was a lieutenant.
Yeah, just... There's that saying that we say, hey, what your boss finds mildly interesting, you find absolutely fascinating, right?
Right.
And there's something to that. And so, just, again, very clear guidance, follow-up and accountability, and that I think will take care of it. If you don't have those, no amount of sincerity is gonna move the needle.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just add is I think the framework for the employee resource groups, the BRGs, I mean, the one way to conceptualize those communities of employees is that internally they have a tremendous advisory capacity to leadership based on their cares about the organization, the values of the organization, the mission, and then the talent and skill that they bring as a community. So not only their professional skills that they contribute, but as a community at being an advisor, a consultant, if you will, to leadership on how to move the work forward in a more important way for that community. And they're also externally facing their ambassadors on behalf of the organization. So in terms of brand, reputation, presence in the community, and in helping leaders get it right inside the organization, whether it's being driven by a compliance orientation, we saw our numbers don't look good, we got to make progress, who do I turn to get advice on that? Or whether it's pursuing it at a higher level because it's effective, it's optimal talent development, and want to build a brand in the marketplace that we're highly inclusive, all talent is welcome here and will be able to contribute. You're looking for a competitive advantage in how you attract and retain talent. So any of those motivations can be part of the conversation, but make a group that may be untapped unless otherwise informed are the employer resource groups that you have to have and understand and believe they have that kind of power and influence to either the CEO or to the executive sponsors that you work with, your HR managers, whatever the case might be. But take advantage of your position and make that case.
Ron, can I leverage something you've been saying about communities? And it's interesting because I got dropped into this community 5.5 years ago when I had a stroke, and I'll be partially paralyzed for the rest of my life. And what's interesting to me is in this room, we are a very powerful community. So I see those of you who, like me, have a visible disability. I know there are those of you in the room who have a disability I can't see, but you're here. And even those of you who would describe yourselves as not having a disability, we're here because we care. Mm-hmm. And we're here because this is a community. And the goal of this community is to put more people in our membership to work because it's a fulfilling part of being a human being. And so it's kind of a wonderful thing to be in this room together. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, very much. And the last thing I'll say is perform so well that it can't be denied.
That's right.
So if you're there, part of your advocacy is hitting home runs in the work you do every day and make a compelling thing. Because when we went on our journey for disability inclusion, and when we talk with the colleagues that were on the teams, the 80% of the information or the feedback they gave us on how the team was doing was the lesson that we all know and take for granted, but it was new for some of our other employees, which was they were so compelling in what they contributed to our team. My mindset shifted from focusing on what they can't do to all the amazing things they can do. And when you can flip the culture that way, that changes a lot of opportunities for the future. So your individual performance in your role is another important construct of making a statement about what excellence looks like and who's capable of producing it. The clock's at 0. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Luke.
It's a pleasure.